Hello there, I'm Jimmy Vegas and this is how to make a racing and driving game in Unity 5 and welcome to episode 5. So this episode we are going to focus on mainly scripting. We're going to get our timer working and record our actual lap time. To do this it requires two main scripts. The first one is going to keep track of what the time is for our lap. The second one is going to transfer it to our best time lap at the end of the lap. So there's going to be quite a bit of scripting in this episode, and if you get stuck at any point or are confused or script doesn't work, head over to the website because I'll put this actual script that we're going to write on there and you can use that script. So right click in the scripts folder, create C# script, and let's call this one Lap Time Manager. So it's also worth noting that actual name because we're going to need to use that when we reference a different script later on in this tutorial. So let's open that up in MonoDevelop or Visual Studio, whichever one you have. And first things first, where you've got using Unity Engine here, hit return or enter, whichever, and then we need to type using Unity Engine .ui. Now the reason we do this is because we're referencing UI elements that we created last episode. If you remember, we created this panel here with our lap time and best time there. We'll need to reference these in the script, and to do that we'll need to use this Unity Engine.ui. So let's get rid of our void start, we do not need that, and let's get rid of this little note there, we don't need that either. So let's start with our variables. So with this timer we're going to need at least a millisecond count, a second count, and a minute count. I'm trying to think. Also, what we're going to need here is a string for the millisecond display. I think that's how it's going to work because we're going to need to do a bit of conversion here. But I'll explain it as we go along anyway. We're also going to need, as I say, the UI objects that we created as well. So we're going to need 7 variables if I count that correctly. So let's get started. Public, and then we're going to put this as static. And then int. So the reason we've got the word static there is because we're going to need to reference it in a different script. So if we weren't to have the word static here in the script, we wouldn't be able to refer to this variable in a different script. I'll explain a little bit more as we get into this episode anyway. So this one's going to be minute count. Minute count. So in other words, the amount of minutes that have passed within this lap. Next one is going to be the same sort of principle. Public, static, int, and it's going to be second count, so the amount of seconds that have passed in this lap. Lastly, for this particular bit, we're going to have public, static, and this one is going to be a float, so it could be a decimal number. You'll see why in just a minute when we kind of deal with something called delta time. So float, and it's going to be milli count, it'll be the milliseconds, and then semicolon. Next thing is public, static, and it's going to be string, and that's a lowercase s. Now a string is a way of defining perhaps text or number, but not necessarily a number that you could multiply with another variable. It's stored as actual text even if it is a number. And we're going to call this milli display, semicolon. I'm going to go down 2 lines here just to kind of split out our variable types. The next 3 are going to be the UI objects that we spoke about a couple of minutes ago. So it's public, game, object, and minute box, semicolon. Next one, you probably guessed it by now, is a public, game, object, and it's going to be second box. And then finally, public, game object, and you're probably way ahead of me at this point, milli box. So these are the 7 variables that we're going to need in this script. So the first thing we do in our void update is make our milli count plus whatever time.delta time is, but we need to kind of multiply time.delta time by 10. So the reason is time.delta time measures how can I put it, like game time, and we want it to count milliseconds rather than milliseconds, so we would just multiply it by 10. So milli count is plus equals time dot delta time, that's a lowercase d and an uppercase T, multiplied by 10, semicolon. So what this is effectively doing here is it's taking milli count and it's adding to it whatever time dot delta time is every single frame. Now, as I say, every single frame it may seem a bit crazy, but you'll see how this works when we actually get the timer working itself. It's just a good, nice, quick way of creating this particular countdown, as it were, or timer. So next we need to do milli display equals milli count, which we've just defined as being time.delta time times 10. We need to convert this to a string to display correctly. So to string, and that's capital T, capital S, and then in brackets and quotes put F0. Now you'll notice there a couple of little things. It pops up with a few little options that you can kind of work with. If you have problems with using F0, you could try using just F or F1. Either one of these options may work for you if F0 doesn't work. And then semicolon. Next thing we need to do at this point is put our milli box to display this particular text that we've just given it. So within this variable now, we've converted this number into a string, so we can display it in a text box. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it always has to be a string. It can be a number if we want to, but in the case of the milliseconds, it does have to be a string, or you may come up with errors. So milli box dot get component. Now the reason we say get component is because if we go back to Unity, go to the panel and go to the milli display here, these are the components, and we're getting the component called text. So we would type get component and then in spiky brackets text, and then open close bracket and then dot text. Now the reason we say text is because we're referring to this component, which is called text, and then referring to this subcomponent called text as well. Although it has an uppercase T here in text, we actually refer to it here as a lowercase t, and that is equal to double quote, which means blank because it has to read it as a string no matter what. So you always have to put double quote there, and then plus, so we'll add to the string which goes in the text box, milli display. So all that's happened here, I'll just quickly go over this again because it may seem a little bit daunting when if you're new to coding, I should say. So what we've done is take milli count, add the actual millisecond to it, and then at that exact point, we've also converted it to a string, and also in that exact same frame, we've put it in our box right here. So after this, we've done the millisecond, so now we need to work with the rest. So if our millisecond gets to 10, then we need to revert it back to 0 so as it recounts to 10. So if, and then open bracket, and put milli count is above or equal, or I should say greater than or equal to 10, close bracket, and then open curly bracket, and then we need to perform the following. I'm going to go to, we've not actually dealt with it yet, have we? No, we've not dealt with ifs. I thought we might have done. So the reason we've done this is because an if statement, as you hopefully should already know at this point, is a way of defining if such a statement is true or false. So if this specific condition is true, then what we need to do is set milli count equal to 0 again, so as it resets, And then because we've got to 10, it means that a second has passed in the game time. So we need to add 1 second to our second count. So second count plus equals 1, semicolon. Next line down is a closed curly bracket. So there is that plus equals again. Same up here, where we've got millicount plus equals delta time. So it's taking whatever millicount is and adding delta time. So then when it repeats itself, it takes it, whatever it is, and adds delta time again. It's the same with this second count. We have it here, and it'll add 1. And then it'll add another 1, and then another 1. That's just how it works when we have plus equal. Also works the same for minus equal, if we ever need to work with that. So the next thing we need to do is we need to update our second count on screen. But we kind of need to, how can I put this simply? We need to do it if it is less than 9 because we need to add a 0. So we can't simply put second box component text equals second count, because as it is a number, it will display as just the actual number itself. It won't have the 0 in front. So rather than have it as 0.9 seconds, it will just have it as 9 seconds. So it wouldn't look right. It would look a bit silly. So that's the reason for this next if statement. So if, and in brackets, second count is less than or equal to 9, then we need to do the following. So close bracket and then open curly bracket. And it's going to be second box dot get component, and then open spiky bracket, text with a capital T, much in the same way we did earlier with the milliseconds, dot text, and then we need to put equals, and then in quotes 0, and then plus second count, and then plus in quotes a decimal place, and then semicolon. So the reason we put that at the end, the decimal place, is because that represents this little decimal place here. If we weren't to have that, it would just look like a load of numbers stitched together. So we've said if that is true, then we perform the following. So what if it isn't true? To get around that, we close that if statement, and on the next line down we put else. So that's saying if it isn't true, then we perform the following. And it's pretty much the same line. So we can copy that line of code, paste it in else, and then get rid of the 0 there. So the reason we've done that is because if it's greater than 9, it's a double-digit number. So we don't need to add this 0 in the text box itself. So after that, close curly bracket, and that's the end of that if statement. So the next thing we need to work on is if the second count becomes 60, we need to add a minute on. Now chances are in this particular course itself we're never going to get that far, but we're going to put it in just in case. So if, and then in brackets, second count is greater than or equal to 60. The reason I put greater than is just in case. You could put a double equals sign there to say if it's always equal to 60, but I like to be a bit different at times. Besides, if you change anything in the future, like if you decide, I don't know, a minute now has 70 seconds, then it's easier to work with, but that would be silly anyway. So yes, so if second count is greater than or equal to 60, then open curly bracket, and we need to make second count equal to 0, semicolon, and we also need to add 1 to the minutes. So minute count, and I'm hoping you guys have got a bit ahead here, plus equals 1, semicolon, and then close curly bracket to finish that if statement. So there's only one if statement left in this script now. Hopefully you guys have figured it out. It's pretty much the same as what we've got here for second count, but for the minutes instead. So if, open bracket, minute count is less than or equal to 9, close bracket and open curly bracket, then we just need to do minute box dot get component, open spiky bracket, text, close spiky bracket, dot, oh, sorry, there's open close bracket there, dot text is equal to, in quotes, 0 plus minute count, and then plus, now rather than have a decimal place like we did with the seconds, we have a colon. So we need to put a colon in that second quote. Semicolon, and then close that if statement, and then else, open curly bracket, and then, as I say, it's the same with the seconds, we can copy that line of code, paste it, and get rid of the 0, and then finally close curly bracket to close that if statement, and then save. So hopefully, if we go back to Unity, we shouldn't have any errors. Perfect. So we need to add this to a game object. So game object, create empty, right click, rename, and let's call it lap time manager. Put an extra M in there. Let's get rid of that. And then let's add this script to the game object. So then we just need to add our text boxes here to display. So min display goes on minute box, sec display goes on second box, and milli display goes on milli box. And I'm going to save my project there. Now when we press play, we should hopefully see our milliseconds counting up and our seconds as well. So there we go, we can see it now. You'll notice it goes a bit funny when it hits 10. Best way to get around that is just decrease the size of the millisecond display. So I'm going to choose this tool here, and I'm just going to close it to about there. And I'll do the same with the best as well, because we'll be playing with that one in just a second. So let's press play again, and we can see it's counting up no problem. So the next thing we want to do is we want to reset our lap time when we cross the finish and transfer it to our best time, as it were. So theoretically you could leave that counting forever and that will count up our time. Again, if you have any problems with these scripts, head over to the website. You can download them for free there. It'll be the exact script that I've typed here, so you don't need to worry if it doesn't work for you. On the flip side of that, if you do have any questions, any problems, you can't figure out why, just leave comment below and I'll try and get back to you. But remember guys, I get a lot of comments every single day. It's hard to read every single one. But if there's a common theme going on where people have problems, I will do my best to respond. So once we've got our lap timer working, what we need to do is we need to create a script to complete the lap. So right click, create, C# script, and let's call it lap complete. So this script is going to be attached to that lap complete trigger that we have here. So if I double click on it to zoom in, we can see that this lap complete trigger was something that we had over the finish line. So if I just put the mesh renderer back on and turn it active, it was this trigger here, if you remember. Control Z to undo that. So this script is going to be attached to it. So same again, once we go in the script, we need to add some UI components to this. So we need to do using Unity engine.ui semicolon, and for this one we don't actually need void start or void update, so we can get rid of them both. We'll be using a different one. So we need a couple of variables in this again. The first one is going to be, in fact the first two are going to be the two triggers that we have set up. So public game object. First one is going to be lap complete trig semicolon. Second one is public game object, and it's going to be half lap trig semicolon. The next three are going to be the display variables, so we'll be displaying the best scores here. So it'll be public game object, and the first one is going to be minute display semicolon. Next one. Public game object second display, and I know you guys are going to be ahead of me at this point. Public game object milli display semicolon. The final one is going to be something called lap time box. Now, the way this is going to work out is, I'll tell you what, I'll explain as we go further along anyway. So, public game object lap time box semicolon. So we're going to use something called on trigger enter with this one, like we did with the half point trigger. So we'll be using the exact same one, except instead of just going on half lap, this is the full one, so we need to record our time and reset that half trigger box. So void, it's going to be on trigger enter, isn't it? Yeah, that's what I said. Open close bracket, open curly bracket. So first thing we need to do is have milli display. Actually, no. Let me just quickly think about this one, because what we're going to need to do is make the actual text boxes equal to whatever we have at that exact point in the lap time manager. So just to be sure we get this perfect, we need to take it a little bit slower, because yeah, we got through this one just fine, but when we pass the trigger on this one, we need to be a little bit careful, because we need it to go straight away. We don't need it to go a little bit funny on us. So let's start with the if statement. If, and in brackets, lap time manager dot second count is less than or equal to 9, close bracket and open curly bracket. So before we go any further, I just want to point out there, hopefully lap time manager for you has turned blue. This is where the static comes in. It means that we can refer to a variable in a different script because they are set as static. So this script is now going to refer to second count that we put in lap time manager. That's what that's going to refer to right there. So same principle as what we did with the 0. If the lap time manager dot second count is less than 9, then second display dot get component spiky bracket text, and then open close bracket dot text is equal to yeah, so it's the 0 in the quotes there, plus lap time manager dot second count plus, and then it's that decimal again right there, semicolon, and then close that if statement, and then else open curly bracket, and then same as we did last time, copy that line of code, put it in and get rid of the 0 because we don't actually need that now, and then close that if statement. So that's how we've done the second count. So we need to do the same with minute. So let's cheat even more, shall we? Because we've already written the code. Why should we write it out again? We can copy this entire if statement, place it down here, and change the word second to minute in every iteration. So here, there should be 5 different places to change it. So there we go. So as it stands now, what will happen is every time we pass the line, it will do the seconds, it will do the minutes. So the last thing we need to do is the milli display. So let me just check we have this best way to do it, because there are a couple of different ways you could do this. It depends how you feel doing it, but I'm doing it separate like this because it gives us more flexibility. I'll explain the lap time box in just a second, because I'll show you a different way, or tell you a different way of doing it. So obviously the last thing we have to do is the milliseconds, but because the milliseconds is going to be, we don't need to worry about its decimal place. It should always be one decimal place. So we can do milli display dot get component text close spiky bracket open close bracket dot text equals double quote plus lap time manager dot milli count semicolon. So as it stands now, we have all those set quite nicely. The last thing we're going to need to do in this particular script is reset all our numbers of that other script back to 0 and sort the triggers out. So to do that, lap time manager dot minute count equals 0. Lap time manager dot second count equals 0. And yeah, I know you're ahead of me again. Lap time manager dot milli count equals 0. So now let's reset our triggers. Half lap trigger dot set active is going to be oh, it's just trig, isn't it? Sorry. Half lap trig dot set active true. And we also need lap complete trig dot set active false semicolon and save. So realistically, I don't think we really needed this lap time box, but the idea of what it does is rather than have 3 separate inputs for our how do we say our time itself, you could have a single box and it would be like lap time box dot get component text is equal to minute display plus colon plus second display plus dot plus milli display. So that would be a cool way of doing it, probably a quicker way of doing it, to be fair. So yeah, I'm just going to close curly bracket, close that on trigger, enter, and save. So the reason I've done it this way is to kind of get you guys used to if statements and else statements and how they work. As I say, it is easier to go over lap time box, and I might quickly touch on that on the next episode. But for now, let's attach our lap complete trigger to our lap complete trigger object. Now set our variables. So min display is minute display, sec display on second display, milli display. Don't need to bother about lap time box because we haven't bothered with that variable just yet. Then lap complete trig goes there. Lap time manager, no, not lap time manager, sorry. Half point trigger, that was it. The last thing we need to do is tick is trigger on the lap complete trigger. And all that does is just turns it into a trigger. So now we should be able to drive. And once we get round, it records our lap time. So let's go in and see if this works. Shouldn't take too long. So hopefully by now we've passed our halfway trigger. So our lap complete trigger should be active on the finish line. And we should see what our lap time is. There we go. 22.2 seconds. Oh, and there we go. So yeah, you guys can play around with it, but that's how you create your actual lap times. So next episode we're going to work on more UI. So we're going to look at a countdown. So when we start it says 3, 2, 1. We'll also look at some other UI, and we may look at actually saving our best lap. So when we reload, it automatically comes up with our best lap time, and if we beat it, then it overwrites. But there's loads of things for us to learn. We'll be moving on to AI cars soon after that episode. So I'd say next one is all about UI and getting the race ready. So until then, guys, as I say, the script is on the website if you have any problems, and I will see you in the next episode. Thank you very much for watching.